and welcome to Fair Trade, a Faith Unfiltered podcast series where courageous people share the candid stories of their faith journey and what brought them to community of Christ. I'm your host, Robin Linkhart, and I'm here today with MaryAnn Scott. Welcome, MaryAnn, and thanks so much for being with us today on Faith Unfiltered.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we want to take a few minutes just to kind of get to know you. So introduce yourself to our listeners as you would if you're meeting somebody for the first time.
Yeah, of course. So I'm MaryAnn Scott. I am a mother of two wild but amazing girls. I have a 7-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they are the center of my world. A little bit about me that I guess makes me a little bit different is that I am a single mom because my husband unexpectedly passed away back in April, which kind of threw everything into a whirlwind and um which led me to being extra grateful for Community of Christ, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. And we recently just moved in with my sister, her husband, and their two girls, and so we currently reside in Hupper, Utah, and I've been corrected several times that's not Hooper, Utah, it's Hupper. And we all know how Utah is with its funny sounding city names. And I work for Western Governors University. I am on their commencement team, so I get to travel for work a minimum of 7 times a year, which is amazing, but can be a lot when you're traveling that much with them. And each time I travel, it's a minimum of 5 days each time, so it adds up. But I love what I do. I love the people I work with, and I just am definitely counting my blessings and grateful for what I have and who I have in my corner. So, um, I guess a random fact about me that I love to share with people is that I'm the youngest of 12 kids. There's 8 girls and 4 boys. I have my two girls, they just on my side of the family, they have 34 first cousins just on my side of the family. And so there's never a lack of somebody to play with when we have family get-togethers. And when we have family get-togethers, we have 100, when everybody gets to come, it's 100 plus people every time. So it's truly everybody has somebody, and that would be my 1-year-old if you can hear her. Um, we are we're just a big rambunctious group, and which I think what leads me into being such the extroverted person that I am and a people lover. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I feel like as we go on through the podcast, you'll definitely learn more fun, random facts about myself, and I'm happy to share them.
Well, thank you so much, MaryAnn, and we're very sorry for your recent loss. Okay, we're ready to hear your story, and I think it would be great to start at the beginning. So we want you to start like where you were born and just go from there. And in the midst of that story, to tell us about faith and God and church during those growing up years.
Yeah, of course. So I was actually born and raised in Kent, Washington, which is, if you're not really familiar with Washington and where cities are, it's about 15-ish miles east of Seattle. So great Seattle area, born and raised. Like I mentioned earlier, I am the youngest of 12 kids. Like I mentioned earlier, 8 girls, 4 boys. So growing up, my childhood was a little bit different than others because my parents didn't really raise me. It was my older siblings. And to have that dynamic definitely made life a bit interesting because even though my siblings raised me, I was like, I kind of learned how to fend for myself because at the same time, they're my siblings. They're not my parents. And so they may have raised me, but they definitely acted still like siblings. And so it was a fight for the fittest when it came to mealtime. And if you wanted the TV, if you wanted toys, it was if you were too slow, you were too slow. And so, um, and now I'm just like, okay, what to say next? Um, but gr a little bit about like the history is that um, as a child, my family, we grew up LDS, very active. We went to church every Sunday. I did, when I was a child, I did all the primary programs. I did Pioneer Day, or our version of it up in Washington. It's a bit different than Utah. All of the Sunday programs, we did the week. And then when I went into activity days, it was the Wednesday activity with all the other girls. And then here comes Young Women's. And in the mix of all that, it was also trying to find that blend of um, the Washington LDS community versus I feel like every state is so different, is finding the balance of how do I balance religion with my friends? Because I was the only Mormon girl in my grade at my whole school. So I was so every year when I went back to school, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, all the way up to high school, being a senior, I was the only LDS girl in my class. And I truly had to like when they say temptation throws things your ways, I'm just like, am I fighting Satan here or am I just doing what my friends are doing? It's just because I was like, my friends were some of the greatest people of my life growing throughout school. And so it's just finding the balance there as well as I did sports throughout all of high school, middle school and high school. So I did track and field, cross country, volleyball, basketball, dance. I was rarely ever home. I always was at school or some sort of practice for a sport. I was at dance class. And if I wasn't one of those places, I was at a friend's house. I was down at the shopping mall that was at the base of the hill I lived on. And so trying to be that balance as well as being like, I want to be there for my friends because when you're a teenager, friends are everything. And when you were home, it was even when you were home, I remember my brother, who's right above me, he's 2 years older than me. He had a group of friends that always lived at our house. I swear they never left. And they were also, and all of his friends that would always come over, they were all also very active LDS members. And so they just called them the Mormon boys. And there was a group of about six of them, and they always lived at our house. And I think it just happened to be that we had lived in a big house, and our house just ended up being the most central place. So when I wasn't with friends, I was at home, I always hung out with them. And being the biggest of big family, I got called all of my siblings' names except for me. So the amount of times I got called Carol, Susie, or Sharon before I even got to MaryAnn, it ended up being that you just respond to whatever name was thrown out. And it's looking back, I was just like, I am forever grateful for the experiences I had as a child and as a teenager and even a young adult where I'm just like, I am forever grateful for them. But at the same time, I'm just like, how could I be so blind to everything going on around me? Like, you just kind of put these visors on and you're like, I need to stay in the right path. I need to make sure that I'm doing good. I need to make sure that, like, I don't get in trouble, which are all great things. But at the same time, I'm like, oh my gosh, I how did I miss those clues? How did I miss those signs? How did I just, was I brainwashed? But I don't like using brainwashed, but I'm just like, how, how did I miss it? But as an adult, though, there's still things I would never change. Like, I would never change the friendships I got through religion as a kid. I would never change the some of the role models as like the leaders. I still talk to this day, even though like that some of them have left the church and I have left the church, and the continued support I've gotten from them. I'm like, if I would have seen those clues back then, I was like, I would have missed out on those relationships and I would not be where I am today. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of an insight of my childhood and kind of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And it sounds like overall, I mean, I'm sure there were times of struggle um, and difficulty, but overall it sounds like it was a feel good, felt safe. You were with people you felt deeply connected with, friends, family, church life. That it was. that it continues to be a source of support and strength for you. It sounds very positive overall.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So you're graduating from high school, and what comes after that? Take us through those years of, yeah, finishing out your teen years and you're going into your 20s, and how does your faith journey continue to unfold during that time?
Yeah, of course. So, a little bit before I graduated high school, a little bit of history is I went to the same school from second grade until my senior year, which is very rare to hear about. And so, a lot of the kids that I graduated with are kids that I went to like elementary and middle school with. And so, I mean, you have people come and go and everything. So, when I graduated high school, my graduating class was about 80 kids, like 80, double digits, which is also very not common to hear from unless you actually grew up in like a small town. But like, let's see. So like the population of Kent, Washington, where I grew up, is just is just over 135,000 people. So it's a decent size city. I mean, it's not like Salt Lake or Seattle, but I'm like, for a city, it's a pretty decent size. So the fact that my graduating class was like 80 kids, you're like, okay. And so after that, a lot of us kind of went our own ways. And I still keep in contact with some of them. Like my friend Rachel, she is a chef in New York City. I have a friend who is a realtor agent in California. I have another friend who's just uprooted her life and went to Atlanta just because she wanted to. And so we just kind of all ended up across the United States. And with me being the only LDS member, I really wanted to like stick true to that and be like, I want to stay on the straight and narrow path. And you know what? The best way to do that is I'm going to go on an LDS mission. And I was like, I'm not going to go to school right away. I'm going to go on a mission. And right about this time that I wanted to serve this mission was about the same time that the LDS Church changed their age requirement for girls from 20 being able to wait, you had to wait until 21, and they changed it to, I believe, 19. And I was like, you know what? That's perfect. I was like, that gives me a year to be able to like save up money, like whatever money I needed left for that mission, save up money, work, focus, and then on my 19th birthday, I'll be able to submit my papers so that by the time my 19th birthday hits, I can go on a mission. And about 6 months after I kind of made that decision, I started working on my papers for that mission. And I had a bishop at the time who just happened to be my one of my best friend's dads. And I remember meeting with him and he was just like, I feel like this is a great plan. I'm here to support you and everything. And we started the papers and I want to say about 2 months after we started working on my papers and everything, we got a new bishopric. And this new bishop we got, nobody really knew him, and which is fine because they're a recently new family to the ward. And I met with him, and he looked me like looked me straight on and was like, "I do not think you would make a good missionary." And that devastated me. And I kind of broke a little bit, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh," he was just like, "I think this would be a mistake. You should not go on a mission. Your focus is here to be a mom." And I was just uh, like, I'm like, how do I respond? And I remember just being silent. And he's just like, he's just like, I don't think this is a good choice. He's like, let me talk to your parents and like do like a meeting with them. Let me meet. So he had told me this before he had even talked to my parents, before he even talked to the stake president, all of that. He just flat out said that to me. And I broke my heart. I was like, how do I move on from that? And I was like, that literally uproots all of my plans for the essentially the next 2 years, 2.5, 3 years. I'm just like, what is my time? What is my goal now? And I remember him meeting with my parents and him meeting with the state presidency and having my parents turn And then being as devoted LDS members as they were, I remember my mom turning to me and was like, I agree with the bishop. You would not be a good missionary. And and to hear that from my own mother broke me. And I remember going into like this depressive state where I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing with my whole life? I was like, and then of course you start having all these self-doubts, being like, am I a bad person? Like, what would make me not be a good missionary? And being so heartbroken and now coming up with a new game plan. And I was like, at this point, I was just like, I don't even want to go to college. I don't want to have any sort of plan. I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm just going to get a job and I'm just going to work. I was like, I don't want to get a higher education. I don't want to become essentially anybody of importance. I'm just here to survive. And I got a job working in a warehouse. And of all things, it was a food warehouse. And I remember the company was called Seattle Gourmet Foods. I actually have no idea if they're even still around. I should probably look them up one of these times and see if they're even still here. But I remember working there and I met this lady and I'm still friends with her to this day. Her name is Ilona and she came here from the Ukraine. And I remember her and I just clicked and working I was of the minority when it came to being an American, like a born, raised American person. I was the minority. Most of the people there were from Mexico, the Ukraine, Russia, the Philippines, Cambodia. It was everybody. And if you were actually like born in the US, you were the outlier, which let me tell you, humbled me. It humbled me and it made me be like, oh my gosh, like I need to check myself because, and these people were some of the kindest people, and the reason I bring this up is because they play such a huge role into my work ethic I have now, being a kind, genuine human. Because of them, I was like, I have a respect for people who uproot their life and come and have to start over from ground zero. And Elona, she was when I got to a point where I like we were sharing our life stories with each other. She sat me down and she's like, MaryAnn, she's just like, don't throw your life away because of the opinion of one person. He was just like, she's like, I don't know this man. I don't know why he told you what he told you. He's like, I have no idea. And she goes, but he doesn't get to depict what you do with your life. And I was just like, okay, she's just like, you know what? And she's like, if you need to have a crisis, but don't make that the point of your story. And that really stuck with me. And I was just like, so whenever we worked and shifted departments, I was like, I need to be wherever Alona is because I need her to put me in check whenever I'm having a life crisis. Because I think the reason why she also was able to talk to me and have it get through to me was because she also has a daughter who's about the same age as me. And so she literally talked to me as if I was her own child. And she was just like, what are you doing? And so her and I just immediately clicked. And because of her, I met so many other people within that community at our workplace that I remember she essentially became like my work mom. And there's a guy there, his name is Roman, and he also is from the Ukraine, and he became like my work dad. And he would tell me he did such dad things that he would be like, MaryAnn, he's like, go up to Alona and say this in Russian. And me being the gullible person I am, I'm like, okay. And I would go to her and say it, and she immediately would know that it was Roman. And she's like, MaryAnn, don't ever say that again. You will get, no. And I was like, okay. And she would go over and she'd be like, you stay here. And I would watch her walk over to Roman. And the next thing I know, she's just smacking him over and over on the arm, yelling at him in Russian. I'm like, whatever he told me to say was a big no-no. But like, it kind of it made it feel like we were a family. And that's what I really needed. And because of them, when it came time for me to leave, or not leave, but when it came time and I left that job, the only reason I left that job was because at that point, through the mix of all of this going on, my parents told us because I was the last kid at home and I had just turned 18. or it was shortly after I had just turned 18. My parents were like, okay, we're moving. And we're like, okay, cool. And she goes, oh no, we're moving to Utah. And I was like, and all of us were like, okay. And and it really came down to my mom. The reason why they wanted to move to Utah was for two reasons: to be closer to the family that were active LDS members, which at that time we were about 50-50. So six of us were still active LDS members, and the other six had left. And the siblings that had left happened to be like the older six. So the ones that were still active were like the younger six. And, or that's okay. In the mix of all of this, about half of us were active, and the half, most of them that happened to be active had all moved to Utah. And my mom was like, I need to go be by the active children, and I need to be in the chosen land. And we're like, okay, mom and dad, if that's what you need, that's what you need. So they moved to Utah and I stayed behind in Washington. And I stayed behind for about 6 months. And then I realized that as a single 18-year-old working at a warehouse, that living in the great Seattle area is expensive. And it's also expensive when you are living on your own. And I was like, I can't afford to do this by myself. And I didn't really want to move in with any siblings. I didn't really want to live with any people because I just heard nightmare stories of like horrible roommates and being left high and dry. And um, I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm going to move to Utah too because I was like, I need a fresh start. So I then left my job and moved about, it was like 850 miles away from everything I knew, all of my friends, my childhood, the house I grew up in, everything, and moved to Utah. And the only people I knew in Utah were my family members. And it was crazy. And I sometimes I regret moving to Utah, but other times though, I'm just like, I think the reason why part of me almost regrets it was because I was like, I left everything. And it like broke my heart. That I was just like, I had options to stay in Washington, but I was so scared of those options. That I was just like, I need to do what's comfortable. And mom and dad are comfort, and mom and dad are in Utah, and I need to go be with them. But again, that's one of those decisions I made where I was just like, I'm also kind of grateful I chose comfort because if I didn't, I wouldn't again be where I am today. I wouldn't have my two girls. I wouldn't have community of Christ. And um that kind of I guess brings me to my early 20s and kind of how I ended up here in Utah. And yeah, so I guess I'll kind of put a pin in there because I know like we'll talk more about how kind of from how I got to my early 20s to where I am now. So we'll kind of put a pin right there for a moment. But yeah, that's a little bit of right after high school to early 20s is my whole life plan got thrown up in the air.
Yeah, that is a lot, especially when you were really tracking to a very well-defined vision and to have someone pop into your life that was not affirming of your choices. And then what a blessing to find Alana at the warehouse and have that really unique experience of being the minority person in a very diverse work community that emerged to be a family, a work family for you. I love that. I think that's a gift in the midst of all of that. But that's a lot to carry. Wow. And then to suddenly have family, mom and dad moving to another state so far away. That's a big deal. So you moved to Utah. You get to be with your family, and they've continued to be a real source of support for you. What came after that? Did you end up at college, a new career? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when shortly after I moved to Utah, I landed a job at, of all places, Burger King, because I was like almost just at that point desperate to have just a job while I looked for more of a stable place of employment. And I worked a few different jobs here and there until um I got the job I have now. But I worked at Burger King. I worked for Bed Bath and Beyond before they started. I don't even know if they have any locations left because I know that they were going through like a foreclosure, a big one. And so I worked for them in their customer service department. So I was in a call center. I worked for, um, I worked for a leasing agency, kind of all over the place. But the job that stuck with me and what really truly gave me my faith crisis. And I was like, oh my gosh, was I landed a job in the custodial department for the LDS Church. And I worked in their triad building, which is KSL, and at that time, LDS Business College before they changed their name to Ensign College. And I'm spacing on what the third business was, but it was essentially triad building because it was three businesses in these buildings, and that's the site that I worked on initially, and I did custodial for them, and so I started out as part-time working there, and to get a job with LDS churches, you have to have a temple recommend, and you essentially have to meet certain criterias to be able to be even considered for the job. So I got this part-time job and I ended up working in that role for, I want to say about a year. And then I ended up getting promoted to full-time. And that full-time position took me from the Triad building to, of all buildings, the church office building. And so I worked in the building where the first presidency was, where the Relief Society presidency, primary presidency, young men's, young women's, so all of the presidencies, I worked in their building. And um that was an eye opener for me. And that's where my faith crisis started. And that I want to say this at this time, it was about 2015. So about 10 years ago, because that was about the time that I met my husband, because he was also a custodian for the LDS Church, and he didn't work in the church office building, but he did work on Temple Square, and he actually worked in the Joseph Smith building. And we ended up meeting, we clicked, and at the time he was also going through a faith crisis, because if you were to know anything, is that in the church office building, there are very specific areas that are restricted. And it's not very many places, but most of the time you have free range to be able to clean all of the offices. In the rooms that are more restricted, the people that clean those rooms are usually the superiors. So that you think of like not even the I don't even think the team leads could even go in there. I believe it had to be like the actual supervisor or lead manager. And those were the people that had to go and clean those rooms because of the confidentiality that was going on and the sensitivity of information. But some of the other rooms that like offices that I cleaned, I remember seeing different documents. And I mean, you're human. Like, it's not like I went snooping and I was like, I'm going to go through all these drawers. I did not do that. And let me clarify that. I did not do that. But some of these people would leave these documents just on their desk, and out of habit, you just glance over and you're like, oh my gosh. And when you see things that are in bold, capital letters, headliners, natural human instinct is you're going to glance over and look. And some of the things I saw, I was just like, it was almost immediate nope. I was like, nope, you need to like focus on garbage and throw the garbage away and get out of that room like ASAP. You need to get out of the room 5 minutes ago. And I remember seeing some information that I was just like, that's not okay. That is not okay. And I saw things like blackmail. I saw threatening letters. I saw, I there was billing statements, but I didn't look at those because it was just like, again, not my like not my place, not my problem kind of ordeal, where I was just like, I don't want that on my plate. I don't want to know the information. I don't need that. Like, I don't need me spiraling over a document I saw on somebody else's desk that I don't even know that person. But natural human instinct is to look. And I remember seeing a lot of stuff, and that's what triggered it, where I was just like, oh my gosh, some of these rumors that you hear they're not rumors, they're facts. And it's that kind of what sent me spiraling. And I was like, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay. I was like, what is happening? I was like, is this actually like a church? Is this a business? Is this what is happening here? And I remember after one day, I remember talking to my parents about it and being like, so I saw this document, and I remember my dad getting so angry at me. And he was just like, why were you looking at this document on this person's desk? And I was just like, I didn't even look. I was like, I glanced at it, and that's what it said at the very top in bold capital letters. And he was like, you shouldn't have even looked at his desk. And I remember my dad getting so defensive, and immediately was just like, don't you dare question anything. Don't you dare try and say anything horrible. And my dad being so defensive about the church. And it was one of those things where I'm just like, you would rather believe the church than something that your daughter actually, like, you would believe the church over your daughter. And at that point, it made me step back, being like, oh my gosh. Like, what is going on here? And me kind of at that point also having like a crisis with my own family, being like, how much like how much or not how much, sorry, like how many people are in the dark. And I was like, and I won't lie, I was one of those people where I was in the dark, and I was like, I need to like I need to find out what I believe in. I need to figure out what is for me, because this stuff, nothing is adding up at this point. From the documents I see to my dad's genuine, like, shocked reaction and him being immediately defensive to now being like, I'm at a loss. And I remember during this time, at the time, my boyfriend and I were starting to get serious, and we're just like, okay. And we needed to make a decision that, like, if we were going to get married, where would we get married? And I was like, do we get married in the LDS church and get married in a temple? I was like, or do we not? And I remember being so scared to not get married in the church that that's the route that we ended up going. And we got married in the Bountiful Temple. And we, it was one of those things where it was going through that interview process with the bishop, and because they ask you different questions. If you've ever gone through a temple recommend interview, they ask you different questions about like tithing, and they ask you questions about like your sexual life, and like if you've ever broken the law of chastity. They talk to you about your faith, and do you believe in the like God the Father, His Son, and the Holy Ghost. Like, they ask you all these, what to them, basic questions. And I remember just lying through my teeth and being like, yes, I believe in all of this. Yes, I pay my tithing. Yes, I am faithful and true. And I remember walking out of that being like, is this what I really want to do? Because once we go through with this, I was like, there's no going back. And we went through with it, and I remember like going through the temple and sitting in the waiting room and being almost sad in aspect that I was like, this is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I'm sad. And I was like, why is this? And I wasn't sad about marrying Stephen, but it was more sad about the ceremony itself. I was just like, I didn't get to have my bridal party next to me. I didn't like my parents and Steven's parents, they got to witness us getting married because all four of them hold temple recommends. And I remember, but the people I wanted there the most couldn't be. And I would think that was the thing I was most sad about. It was just like my best friend, my best friend who was a bridesmaid, my sister who was my maid of honor, none of them could witness it. And being so sad and also partially angry that I'm just like, why can't they celebrate with me on what's supposed to be the happiest day of my life because of these requirements? And that also kind of what pushed me even further into my faith crisis. And I was like, I'm not sure if I can do this. And fast forward about like about 3, 4 months later, I find out that I'm pregnant. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, now I'm bringing another human into this world. And I'm still trying to figure out all of this stuff. And she comes into the world. We give her a baby blessing and everything. And at that point, that's when my husband was giving our daughter a baby blessing. That's when he hit his, like, I'm done because I can't fully speak on his behalf because I don't know, but from what he has shared with me, he just said it was the most weirdest feeling holding this infant in a circle and having people like these men all like hold her, and he's like it needs to be more of like he said it didn't feel intimate, it didn't feel special, it just felt weird. And he was just like, it almost felt culty in a way. And he's just like, I didn't like it. I didn't like it one bit. And at that point, my husband was like, I'm done. I need to bow out. And so at that point, he was out and he was like, I'm done with the LDS Church. I need to step away from religion. And I stuck in for a little bit longer and I just trying to figure out what I want for my daughter. And I honestly stuck around a lot longer than I thought. And it was about when she turned about 1. We had moved from, at that time, we were living in an apartment and we moved into a house. And in this house, we lived in a community where about 85% of my neighbors were over the age of 60. So we were the odd men out, being this young couple, still in the honeymoon phase, a 1 year old, and we're just like, oh my gosh, how there's no primary, there's no young women, there's no young men's. I Between baby and 18, there were 4 kids. And it was pretty much two nursery age kids, a junior primary age, and a senior primary age. Or sorry, yeah, a senior primary age kid. So I guess between the ages of 0 and 12, there were 4 kids. And the amount of times that we got nasty looks from people whenever our daughter would start crying and it would be like, why can't you control her? And I'm like, she is a baby. Like she's an infant. And these older people just being so angry that we literally got pushed out. And at that point, that was my breaking moment where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And I was like, this is not the community that I knew because the community I had up in Washington when it came to LDS Church, with the exception of that one bishop, was great. I had amazing leaders, I had amazing teachers, my friends were great. And then moving down here, it was almost like a 180 where I was just like, oh my gosh. And it was just like that stereotype. And I did not like it. And at that point, I broke and I was like, I'm done. And I tapped out and we walked away from the LDS church. And at that point, my husband, the only reason why he would even go to church, because like I mentioned, he was done after the baby blessing, and the only reason he would even go on some Sundays was to support me. And when I hit my breaking point, he was just like, "Okay, we're done. Let's get out." And we stopped religion altogether for a few years, and I was just like, "I can't do this." I was like, I need something that's genuine. I need something. It doesn't even have to be 100% true. I was like, if I ever do religion again, I need it to be genuine. I need it to be a people church. Like, I need it to be a community. I need it to be a church that supports people, that supports humankind, I need a church that's a community. And that's what we looked for. And that's kind of where we kind of, I guess, land on Community of Christ. And we found, and that brought us up to about, so Haley was 1, my oldest was 1 when we walked away from the church. And fast forward to Haley being about four. So 3 years later is when we came across Community of Christ. So 3 years of just no religion, nothing, just
Hmm.
deconstructing as much as possible. And I'm still deconstructing. Let's be real.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still 6 years and I'm still like, oh my gosh.
Yes, for sure. So, wow, that's quite a story. So, how do you get from pretty much just setting religion over to one side? And you talk about your sense of wanting to have some type of church community, something that's genuine, that truly is community, and a church that supports humankind. So larger than supporting the congregation itself, but a sense of outward support for humankind as a whole. So how do you get from where you are and you're having this longing? I'm not sure where Stephen was on the journey at that point. And how did you find Community of Christ? And take us through to today.
Yeah, of course. So Haley had started going to preschool and she has being in preschool, they talk about the most random things ever. And so she'll come home from school one day and start talking about all like the most off the wall things that kids talk about, being like, did you know that like I can't even think of any right now because it was so off the wall. But I remember her coming home one day and being like, Mom, is there a Jesus? Like, is there a Jesus? And I was like, what? And she's just like, somebody at school said that there's a Jesus somewhere and that he's always around us and he loves us. And it was just so random. I was just like, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm like, are you talking about like Jesus, like church Jesus? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, I don't know. And I just kind of try to beat around the bush. I was just like, I don't know, like, because again, I'm trying to deconstruct, figure out what I believe in, and I'm like, I was like, I'm not about to have a Jesus talk with my like 5-year-old. I was like, or almost 5-year-old. I was like, my 4.5-year-old. I was like, I'm not ready to have this talk with my child. I was like, I'm not even ready to have this talk with myself. And and then she just got stuck on it and she just kept asking about Jesus and she kept asking about if there's a God. And I was like, this is such a random thing for a 4.5-year-old to be asking about, which makes me think I'm just like, who are her friends at school? Like, what are they talking about? And I wanted to be like validating to her, being like, I want you to believe in what you believe in, but I'm like, but you're four. Like, you don't need to be talking about this stuff. But she would not drop it. And it wasn't like an everyday occurrence, but it was enough for me to be like, okay, maybe we should maybe start truly deconstructing and maybe finding a community that works for us. And um I remember talking to Steven about it, and he's just like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to find a community, like a religion yet. And he's like, I'm not sure. And then I was like, let's just look. I was like, I'm not saying that we have to jump headfirst into a religion. I'm not sure. Like, we don't have to do anything. I just want to see what options are out there that are not the actual like LDS church. Like, I was like, I'm not going back. I don't want to go back. And he was just, and it was almost like a relief to him. I was just like, I'm not looking for that. I was like, I want to look for like a community. And I kid you not, this man, he looked up a few different churches. He went to like two or three, and he was just like, and he comes back to me a couple weeks later and he's like, MaryAnn, you know how you said that you're wanting to like look for like a community? And I was like, yeah. He goes, there's literally a church called Community of Christ. And I was just like, what? And he's just like, yeah, he's like, they literally have community in their name. And I was like, okay. And I was like, what do you know about them? And he's just like, not much, other than the fact that they're off of Craig Drive in Mill Creek, and it's like 10-15 minutes from us. And I was like, okay. And he was like, should we go check it out? And I was like, let me think about it. And literally, I said that, and about an hour later, I was like, yep, let's go look. And he's like, so much for thinking about it, MaryAnn. And and that I want to say that it was like midweek. So a few days later when it was Sunday, we went and checked it out, and there was one review of this congregation on Google, and it was like a post that had been made like 8, 9 years ago, and it was so off the wall review that Stephen was just like, I don't know who, like, is this a joke, like a joke review? And we're just like, well, we'll check it out because we had also never seen reviews left for churches before. So we're like, let's check it out. And we went to church, and I remember walking in, and one of the members of the congregation had come up and introduced themselves to us, and her name was Monica, and she just talked to us and was just like, "How old is your daughter?" And I was like, "Oh, she's about 4.5. She'll be 5 in May." And she stopped and she's just like, "In May?" And I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "There's also another girl here who's literally the exact same age, whose birthday is also in May." And it happened to be that that little girl that she had talked about was Carla Long's daughter. And Carla had just got released and was no longer the pastor. Like she had just been the pastor of the congregation, and it was her daughter who is the same age. I want to say that they are not even a week apart. They're like 5 days apart or something like that. Born the same year and everything. And it was almost an instant best friend for my daughter. And those two are two peas in a pod. Haley and Leah immediately clicked. And I remember being like, okay, I was like, this is a good sign. I was just like, I can do it. We can handle this. And Stephen and I were still like maybe made it 5 feet into this building before we were just like met by Monica. And um we had asked them, we're just like, do you guys have like a bishop, a pastor? Like, what do you guys have? And they're like, oh, this is Brittany. And um Brittany had like walked off to somewhere, and I couldn't, part of me was just like, okay, but who's Brittany? And I was just like, that didn't answer my question. Like, do you guys have a bishop, a pastor, or anything? And then Brittany comes over and talks to us for a bit, and she literally had introduced herself as Brittany. And at this point, she had only been the pastor, I think, for like 2 weeks. Like, it was brand new. And talked to her and everything, and she walks away, and Monica goes, "Oh, to answer your question, that's the pastor." And I was like, what? And I was like, it was one of those things where I'm like, she didn't give me pastor vibes. And I think it's because in my brain, I was thinking LDS bishop. So I was expecting like suit, tie, like I won't lie, I was expecting a man. And just have Brittany come up and be so casual and so down to earth and talk and everything and just vibe with us and then walk away. It was one of those things where I was just like, okay, I could get used to this. And we join and we come in and we have Sunday school first, which also threw me for a loop because I was like, again, I'm like, this, we're doing this backwards. Like, aren't we supposed to meet like as a whole first and then separate into our classes instead of separate and then come together? And it was weird for me at first, but at the same time, though, I was like, this is so nice because then when you get to church, you can get all of your wiggles and hectic neck and it's out. And then when you come together, it's at that point, you're like, you're more unified. And I was like, and I love that. And I was like, I'm here for it. And we kept coming back. And we don't know, at least for me, I can speak for myself on this, is where I'm like, I don't really know what it was at first, what kept bringing me back. But I realized it's the people, the community that I have now. I was like, I'm forever grateful for them because then this past year, with all of the hardship that my little family has gone through, I they showed up every single time without ask, without expected for me to pay them back, without expected of anything from me. They showed up. And so, and that's something that I can also share maybe like later on or something like that, of just kind of like the or even in this podcast, if we have the time of just like the community showing up time and time again for me and my
Mhm,
girls. And I don't know if I would have ever gotten that from an LDS ward.
mhm.
And just the love and the genuine people, I'm like, I'm grateful. And yeah.
So, how did it go when you found out that Community of Christ shares common heritage with the LDS Church? Because it sounds like you weren't
Yeah.
aware of that
Yeah.
connection going in, and
Yeah.
certainly your experience was very different. How did you find that out, and how did that play for you and Stephen?
Yeah. So going into it, I definitely did not know that we had the Community of Christ and the LDS Church shared similar heritage. And it wasn't until a couple weeks in that, okay, going into I didn't know, but I had seen not necessarily red flags, but I saw flags of being like, I see a Book of Mormon, but it was like a revised version. And I saw a couple other things where I was just like, hmm. I was like, I wonder. And it was in the library of the church. And I was like, maybe we're in Utah. Maybe it's just because they want to just keep history of like the local churches or something like that. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later we had a discussion in Sunday school about like the history of Community of Christ. And up until this point they're finishing up a discussion that was already going on about something else, which is why I never like made connected the dots until we had this discussion of the history. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I was like, this is why everything feels so familiar, is because it has a basic root, like it has a similar root. And but it's the same, but it's way not the same. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was like an eye opener for me where I was like, okay, I can maybe be on board with this, maybe. And I won't lie, I did put some reserves up. Like I put guards up and I was like, we'll see how this happens. Because I was like, I had already felt so at home just in those few weeks. I was just like, I really don't want to have to like l- I have to deconstruct again, essentially, where I'm just like, I don't want to be pushed out of a religion again, but I never felt that. So I was just like, what is it? And then actually learning the history and learning like how Community of Christ came to be versus the LDS Church and how they came to be. I was just like, I okay, and I still had my guard up and everything, but moving forward to each week and seeing the the values that Community of Christ teaches and what they hold. I was like, okay, I was like, there's no standard, there's no expectation that you have to meet these expectations. There's no, like, no, if there is no, if you don't meet these guidelines, you can't enter, like, you can't have these certain items. Like, you have to meet this criteria if you want to get into the celestial kingdom. It's be a good human, and whatever happens after death. And we're like, okay. and, and I mean, it's not, that's essentially the basic way of saying it. Is just like, just be a good human, be a good person. Like, just don't be a murderer. Don't break the law. Like
Hmm.
that's what it was that I also kept me coming, is the fact that it's just we're all trying to survive and we just need to focus on bringing the best version of ourselves out and just accepting people for just doing their best. And I was here for it, and I was like, I can get on board for this compared to like the LDS Church, where it's just like you have to follow these guidelines. You have to follow the 13 articles of faith and the family proclamation to the world, and you have to fit into this margin. And at Community of Christ, it's almost just like forget the margins. Like, we want to stay out of them. Like, we want to get out of the margins. And I was like, okay, I'm here
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah, Community of Christ is more about being present and supportive of the marginalized people in society that are living on the edges because they don't fit in, right? So it's been a very
Yeah.
different transition for you compared to many people who are active in moored life until, they have difficulties. Some try to stay in, and the transition for some is more a process of, um, it's a big transition, but sometimes it's a sense of loss as well. And you and Stephen had already kind of stepped out and away, and it was a much different path and a sense of trepidation almost when you find out Community of Christ shares some common heritage and have the red flags looking for, okay, we don't want this part of what that heritage brings, and just figuring out as you walk into that. So now, and you've been there several years now, as you walk with church members and friends and new seekers, what do you see other people looking for in their church or faith experience, and what connects for them in meaningful ways as they choose to journey with or spend time with Community of Christ? So, in a sense, what are the big life questions that you're hearing from other spiritual refugees that are traveling the way, trying to find their place?
Yeah. I think the biggest question that I see like new seekers walking through and what questions they had is what is out there? Like, is there a God out there? Is it just us trying to figure out life? It's wanting to essentially know that they aren't alone. And I think that's the biggest thing that I see come through is that people, they don't want to be alone. And I get that. And it's whether that be on like a physical level, a spiritual level, they long for something or somebody. And I remember um this was back in December. I remember Matt and Heather of our congregation had walked through the door for the first time ever. And they were kind of doing the same thing that we were doing, when we had first walked through the doors, that they were looking for something that works for them. And I remember um, they walked in as we were getting our Christmas tree set up, and our Christmas tree fell over on top of Miranda. And this Christmas tree, let me tell you, is like a 10-foot tall tree, okay? It's huge. And they walked in right as they just went on top of somebody and almost gasped. And I was like, "Hi, I'm MaryAnn." And I turned to like let them know what we were doing, or as the tree fell over. And I turned back and I was like, "We're not usually this chaotic." And then and I remember Courtney being like, "Yes, we are," like in the background, like saying that we are that chaotic. And immediately Matt and Heather just started laughing. And Matt was like, "I think this is our people." And they had been there not even 5 minutes and immediately came over and helped us put our Christmas tree up, because I'm like, tell me why four of the smallest people in the entire congregation are the four people that were putting up this 10-foot tall Christmas tree. And I mean, we were just laughing and being like, oh my gosh, I hope that they come back the next week. And I was like, I just want them to come back. Like, I just hope that our chaoticness didn't scare them away, because that's just how we are. We were being our genuine selves. We were having a good time. And that's how we were spending our Sunday school, was decorating for the season. And they just fit right in. And I remember the following week, they came back, and everybody will talk about this of just how excited I was at the fact that they came back and being like, "Oh my gosh." Because if I won't lie, if it was me, I don't know if I would have come back. But they did, and I remember being genuinely happy. And Matt and my youngest daughter, Phoebe, are two peas in a pod. And so every time they show up, Phoebe will like turn into a fish out of water in my arms, and I'll put her down and she will A-line it to Matt, like without skipping a beat. And it was almost just like that is what people long for is just that connection with people and feeling like they are wanted.
Mm,
Like we want you there. We want you to feel loved. We want you to feel welcome. We want you to feel like you are important because you are. And I feel like that's so many times where in like other congregations, not necessarily in Community of Christ, but in like other religions, their congregations walking in and having that fearful moment, being like, will I be seen? Will I be loved? Will I be welcomed?
mhm,
And that's one thing that I long for. And I hope for that whenever somebody walks through the door of Community Christ, that I can give people that welcome that I got from Monica when we showed up
mhm,
is walking in. So seeing like Matt and Heather walk in, I was just like, I'm MaryAnn. I'm so glad you're here and I want you here. And just
mhm,
being the fact that they came back and I was like, and that's what I hope to be able to contribute to Community of Christ is at least being able to fill that portion of their cup and being
mhm,
like, we want you here. Not that we need you here. Because I was like, I, I feel like that's almost pointless. I was like, feeling wanted, I feel like is such a deeper meaning than being like, I need you. Be like, no, I
mm,
was like, I want you. Like, I
mhm.
want you in my life. I want you to be a part of it. I want you part of this community. And I do my best to give that because that's what I got. And I
Yeah.
hope to be able to help people on their faith journey when it comes to at least that portion.
Yeah, that's so important, so important. As you look at Community of Christ as a whole, as we journey together as a people into the future, in the midst of a lot of chaos in the world today, what are your hopes for Community of Christ?
I feel like that is such a big question. Um, like my hopes for Community of Christ is just to keep being a safe place for people to come, to be able to bring people to Christ, if you want to say it that way, but to bring people to a safe place where they can know that they can practice their faith and be able to have a safe place to do that without judgment, but to be themselves while they do it. We don't want you to try and fit into a mold. We don't want you to try and be a certain type of person. We want you to be your true, genuine self. We want you to live your heritage. We want you to live your way as long as you are being like as long as you're not going out there breaking the law, like as long as you are trying your best to be a decent human, we want, I hope that Community of Christ can like continue on that path of being essentially a safe haven for people to come and practice religion and doing it in a community form and being able to come together and know that we all have similar faith beliefs and knowing that we're not going to push you out the door just because you have an opinion. We
Hmm.
want you to have an opinion, and I hope Community of Christ can continue that route of allowing people to have opinions, to allow them to challenge a question and not be shut down, to be able to
Hmm.
be like, hey, I like when we talk about doctrine, I mean, like, hey, I see it this way, and being like, yes, share, please, like, give me your insight and challenge people to think outside the box and to be like, it doesn't have to be black and white. Sometimes things are just gray, and that's just how it is, unfortunately, and continue to let people practice that. And that's what I hope, because I think that is so important. And I know that that's one reason I keep coming back is that I can ask questions and not be like, no, 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 no. You need to
Hmm.
let's come back over here. It's just like, okay, like you see this little path, let's go take that little path. Let's see where it takes us. And guess what? And if it ends up taking us nowhere, that's okay. We that's okay. And then guess what? If it takes us somewhere, awesome. Let's keep digging. And it's being able to let people explore their faith journey and being able to be like, it's okay if there is two, three, four, or 10 different ways to read a story in like the book of Matthew or something. Like it doesn't have to be black and white. And that's one thing I absolutely love about Community of Christ is that it's not black or white.
Yeah.
It's 50 shades of a faith journey.
I love
Yeah.
it.
And
Along
I
with a rainbow of color.
right? A splash of orange here, a splash of red there, and a whole lot of mm, turquoise in the middle.
So, Marianne, what do you need Community of Christ to hear you say?
Oh, I've for this, I've thought about this question a lot. And I don't know if I've ever actually landed on something that I need the church to hear me say. And I think it's because coming from the LDS background, especially being unfortunately a woman who identifies as a woman, you don't get a voice. And when you have something to say, it's no, you don't. And I've thought a lot about what I want Community of Christ to hear me say. And I think what it is I don't really have anything to say. I just want them to see me. And so far they have. And I was like, I just want you to know that I'm here. I have a voice. I'm still trying to find that voice. And I think it's what I just need Community of Christ to know is that we are here.
Hmm.
The people who feel invisible are here. And I think that's just the biggest thing is I just want to be not necessarily heard. I just want to be seen.
Hmm. Well, is there anything that I have not asked you today that you would like to share with our listeners?
Um, I I think we're I I think I've shared a lot. I've shared a lot
Mhm.
today. I've kind of word vomited in some areas, and I have learned to not apologize for being myself, and I'm still working on that, of that I am allowed to take up space.
Mhm.
But I think I was like, if there's anything that you haven't asked me that I would like to share is, I don't even know. My favorite animal is a sloth. There we go. If you didn't ask me what my favorite animal was, and it's a sloth.
I love
But
it.
no, I think we're in a good place, Robin.
Well, thank you. I just want to reaffirm that we are so glad that you're here with us in Community of Christ. And I've heard so many people in the Salt Lake City congregation affirm the blessing that your presence is in the community, you and your family. And you are making a difference for sure. And I want to thank you for spending time with me today here on this interview, Marianne. And I just want you to know that it has been a true joy to get to know you and an honor to receive your story. Thank you so much.
Of course, and hopefully one of these times we'll actually be able to meet each other in person. So,
And a very special thanks to all of our listeners. If you would like to hear more from courageous people willing to share the candid stories of their faith journey and what brought them to Community of Christ, check out our Fair Trade series on faithunfilteredpodcast.org or click on the link listed in today's show notes, which will take you to all of our Fair Trade episodes. This is your host, Robin Linkhart, and you are listening to Faith Unfiltered podcast. go out and make the world a better place. Take good care. Bye bye.